Hey everyone, and welcome to my July wrap-up. It is quite the gloomy day here in Wales, but we will power through anyway. I had a pretty successful reading month in July, in large part due to the booktubeathon. I'm actually going to start by talking about a book that I DNF'd, which is something I don't think I've ever really done in a wrap-up. I've never spoken about something I DNF'd. I got a little over halfway through Smoke by Dan Vyleta, which is a book that is getting so much hype and attention. This is essentially a story about a world where sin shows up on the body in the form of smoke, and the upper class in society have discovered a way to control this. Really interesessing premise. I was really intrigued, but I just really didn't get into the book. I didn't find myself attached or liking any of the characters. I found the plot thoroughly boring. So yeah, I may pick it up again at some point, maybe if I'm in a better headspace for it. Maybe it was a good book at the wrong time for me, but I DNF'd Smoke. I didn't enjoy it. On to something slightly more positive. I read The Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan. You may remember I was kind of halfway through this at the end of my June wrap-up. I was really looking forward to this book, and I was slightly let down by it. It wasn't kind of what I expected. This follows two characters, North and Callanish, who live very different lives, but over the course of this book, their worlds collide. North is what is called a dampling, which means she is from and lives on the sea, and she travels with a circus with her bear, who she performs with. Callanish is what is called a Gracekeeper. She lives a solitary life on land, where she performs funerals for the damplings who had died at sea. I thought this was a really good book, and if it is kind of like your cup of tea, then I think you would thoroughly enjoy it. It just wasn't really what I look for in stories. I was really interested in the circus elements of the book, and the writing was beautiful, but I just wasn't interested in the characters enough for this to make me love it. Next up, I read Paper Girls Volume 1. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the art from this first volume of a graphic novel because I borrowed it from a friend and I've given it back now. This follows a group of young girls who go on a paper round, and some sci-fi fantasy elements come into their lives. It takes place on Halloween, so it's kind of got that element of, is this something supernatural or is it just someone in a costume? I didn't absolutely love this story. I guess it's unfinished because it's just one volume, and I would be interested in picking up the second volume, so I guess that's a good sign of it being an enjoyable read, but I wouldn't be in a rush to buy it or anything. I think it would be something that if I got the chance to borrow it, I would, but I don't think I would rush out to buy it for myself. Next up, I read The Girl Who Beat Isis by Farida Khalif and Andrea C. Hoffman. This was a very important non-fiction read about a girl named Farida. Farida isn't actually her real name. She's using a pseudonym for anonymity and safety. This tells the story of a young girl who is very much looking forward to going back to school after her summer holidays, but through this book, we follow the rise of ISIS and what she sees on her TV screen and in her community leading up to an ISIS attack on her hometown. Men and boys are killed and the women are taken captive. She is separated from her mother. This follows the terrible things that happened to Farida. I do have a full review of this one, and I will leave it down in the description. It is a very important book, and I was shamefully quite ignorant of a lot of the things that were going on. It's actually almost written like a children's book, like things are explained very simply, but still enough that you understand to a certain extent what's going on. And I think it's important to remember that while Farida beat ISIS, there are countless number of girls still enduring the terrible things that happened to her. Next up, I have another very important book, and that is Asking for It by Louise O'Neill. I buddy read this with Mel, and I thoroughly enjoyed buddy reading with her. I'll leave a link to her channel down in the description. It was really great to share the journey of this book with someone because it was just, there was so much to talk about, and I feel like it was kind of supportive to go through this book with somebody else. I don't even really know where to begin with this book. It is one of the best, most important, most valuable reads I've ever had. This is about a schoolgirl named Emma, and it is set in Ireland, and it follows what happens leading up to and after she is raped by a number of boys that she... Obviously, consent and rape culture are two things that are covered quite heavily in this book, but there is also a huge amount about the effects of trauma. Apologies if you can hear all the trucks going past my window. The mental effects of trauma and the physical effects of trauma. What happens when an attack like this goes viral online, and why it is so difficult for rape victims to come forward. I've always considered myself very clued up on consent and rape culture, but this book showed me things that I'd never even considered before. It made me reconsider how I think about things like this that happen. I have a full review for this one, and I will leave that linked down below as well. So just before the booktubeathon started, I finished up reading The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon, and I thought this was a really great book. This is set in the heatwave of 1976 in a small English town. It is an ordinary street in an ordinary town, but this street is full of secrets. And these secrets start to come to light due to the disappearance of a woman named Mrs. Creasy. Nobody knows what has happened to Mrs. Creasy, but two young girls named Grace and Tilly decide that they're gonna find out. They conduct a number of interviews with people that live on the street, and while they're at it, they decide that they're going to try and find God as well. This is predominantly from Grace's perspective, though we do get glimpses into the other people on the street, and this tells us more about the secrets that many people are holding. I really enjoyed the child perspective that is used in this book. It always makes for very funny, very innocent, brilliant writing when there's a child's perspective or a child narrator. But I did think this book slightly suffered from missing parent syndrome. Considering some of the stuff that is going on in this book, I don't think that if I was a parent, I would want my 10-year-old children wandering around. But nonetheless, I thought it was a really good book. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, I do have a full review, which is linked down below. Then came the booktubeathon. I do have a full wrap-up for the booktubeathon in itself, so I will link that down below if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on the books that I read during that. I will just list the books quickly, I won't go into them in any detail here. So I read The Smell of Other People's Houses by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock, The Heart Goes Last by Margaret Atwood, Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, The Vegetarian by Han Kang, and Letters to a Young Poet by Raina Maria Rilke. The final book that I read in July is something that I don't quite know how to convey all my feelings on. This was a book that I was looking forward to for a really long time. That is Nina Is Not Okay by Shappi Khorsandi. You may be familiar with Shappi Khorsandi as a stand-up comedian. Up to me reading it, there were a few little things that happened that made me look forward to it a little less. But I tried to go into it with a very open mind. This was a fantastic book. It was brilliant. But I did have a few problems with it that they're really niggly, and I'm really disappointed in this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, so it is a fantastic book. It is brilliant. You should go read it. I just really wanted it to be 5 stars. So this is a book that deals with family, loss, alcoholism, consent, sexism, rape culture. Nina is a 17-year-old girl with a drinking problem, though she doesn't realise this for quite a while. She thinks her level of drinking is pretty normal for a teenager that likes to go out and have fun. She can barely go a day without drinking alcohol, and often she can't remember the nights out that she's had, though normally she is able to piece it all together with the help of her friends, until one night. Nina is kicked out of a club for going down on a guy named Alex. Nina remembers getting home in a taxi, but she doesn't remember what happens in between getting kicked out and being in the taxi. Obviously, this is a very important and sensitive subject, quite similar to Asking for It by Louise O'Neill, and because I read them so close to each other, it's difficult not to compare them. Whether that's right or wrong, it's something that was going on in my head, and I think I couldn't help but think I preferred Asking for It, but that's ridiculous. They can both coexist. One doesn't need to be better than the other or just as good as the other. There needs to be more stories about these kind of topics. And in fact, Nina Is Not Okay has a number of things that Asking for It didn't have. It is dealing with alcoholism on top of everything else. And something I really loved about this book was the fact that Nina is bisexual. This follows her exploring and coming to terms with her sexuality, and I have been looking for fantastic books featuring bisexual characters, so thanks, Shappi. This book also features quite a bit of critical thought on modern feminism, and it highlights some of the contradictions and hypocritical elements of it. And I do think that dialogue is important, and I think Shappy touched on a number of really important things that as feminists we should be considering. But I do feel that overall feminism was portrayed in a slightly negative light. The only character who is referred to explicitly as a feminist and straight up says, "I'm a feminist," is kind of naggy and pushy. And I know some feminists are naggy and pushy. It just didn't really seem that there was an alternative given, but it is definitely good to encourage critical thought nonetheless. I do think this is a book that everyone should read, particularly because it encourages so much reflection and thought. I mean, maybe I should be giving it 5 stars because it has made me think so much, but just those little niggly things I can't get away from. This month I read a lot of books about very heavy and important topics, so I think I might give myself some nice summary reads in August. And I don't want to stop reading books about very important topics, obviously. I just feel like I need to mix more lightness in. I maybe mix some more children's books in just for a bit of balance and to give myself a little bit of a breather and a break. If you have any thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned, do be sure to let me know down in the comments. I do have full reviews for quite a few of the books that I've mentioned, and they will all be linked below. And as well, if you are interested in any of the books that I mentioned that I read for the Booktubeathon, there is a full wrap up for that down below as well.